All right, what a privilege to be with you all, Brigadier Wright. Chris, thank you for putting this together. Really appreciate your time here, sir. And to all of you all, thanks for allowing me to do this. I really appreciate our Chief of Staff, our boss, General Mark Milley, for allowing me to do this today. This is a rare opportunity for me. I hope I can say something relevant. I hope we can learn something from each other. It will be a bit interactive. So I'll start off by saying this. Congratulations to you all. Congratulations on a decision you've made. Right? You've made a decision to serve your country, and it's not a decision to make once. It's a decision to make time and again. So I've been in our Army now for 24 years, and I make a decision every day to get out of bed and stand up, answer the bell, and continue to serve. And some of you are married, many more of you will be married, and eventually families start to make this decision. So it really is a long-term vocation that we sign up for, and to me it's the noblest of professions. So I congratulate you on that. I also remind you that our countries have been at war for a very long time with the malevolent energy, Al-Qaeda and the global Salafist Jihad. We're in our 18th year of sustained combat. And there's no guarantee that any of this is going to go our way. There's no guarantee that it's going to go our country's way. There's no guarantee it'll go your country's way. It's no guarantee that it'll go the alliance's way or the world's way, and that's why you matter. So I thank you for what you do. And you got to continue to answer the bell. You really do matter. And I recognize that about 180 of you before the sun rises on Saturday will be second lieutenants. Where are you all? Where's that crowd? Congratulations to you all. It's awesome. It is. It's great. But it's just the beginning, right? The hard work's really in front of you. So as much as you've paid a price to get to this point, which we congratulate you, the real work, being the lieutenant that your soldiers deserve, is still in front of you. So let me offer you a couple pieces of simple advice here on small unit leadership. And hopefully some of this, I'm going to boil it down, make it real simple. It's 3 big ideas. I transmit them in 3 words each. The first one, I think the key to small unit leadership, no matter what you do, is set the example. We each have our own talents. We each have our own propensities. But what we can always choose to do is prepare. What we can always choose to do is to be tough, be courageous, to have willpower when it's violent, uncertain. That's a decision we make. Always set the example for your soldiers. Number 2, always complete your mission. Think about the word lieutenant. In lieu of what? A placeholder for what? The commanders can't be everywhere, right? That's why we have who? The lieutenant. In lieu of the commander. You're a placeholder for the commander. And there's going to be times where it's too cold, it's too hot, it's too violent, it's too uncertain. And whose responsibility is it to always complete the mission? It's the lieutenant. That's why you matter. If you can't complete your mission, your commanders and your soldiers don't really need you. So the first big idea, set the example. The second one, complete the mission. And when you fight, ground combat's not for the weak-willed, right? It's hard. And when you fight, the situation is always changing. That's the natural order of things in combat. If you ever think your mission has changed, who must you have a conversation with? If you think your mission has changed? Your commander. Or otherwise you're executing the last orders given, right? Complete your mission. And then the third big idea is solve the problem. So I was recently in the Pentagon with the chief, and we were sitting in a meeting, and a staff officer with a relative amount of behind-the-scenes influence and the way they kind of been American officers, he put forth his idea of why an American officer should become an infantry officer. Male, female, it doesn't matter, but how we should choose our infantry officers. It was very surface level. He stated that our infantry officers should be fit, our infantry officers should be tough. That's all important. But don't ever forget, we value your minds. We value your minds. We pay you to think. I encourage everybody, hurry to think, not to plan. And when you are stuck in a fight and lives are on the line and the mission's on the line, you just got to think faster. So my 3 simple pieces of advice to all of you who are about to go out there and be the leaders that your soldiers deserve. 1, set the example. 2, complete your mission. 3, solve the problem. All right, let's talk about ISIS. I'm going to give you my perspective on ISIS. It's one guy's perspective, and it is distinctly mine. Nothing I'm saying here is not cosmic. Very little is going to be novel. I've taken it from a whole bunch of different people and then kind of synthesized it, put it together, and as we walked through it in the 2nd Brigade Combat Team with the Iraqi security forces, as I reflect upon that experience of 9 months of grounding combat in Mosul, these are kind of my perspectives on who this so-called Islamic State is. All right, I'll start this off by asking a simple question, and go ahead and sound off, please. I'm all about ill structure. It'll be good. All right, first thing. What is the difference between what the Islamic State did, this so-called caliphate, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and his organization? What's the difference between what it did and what Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda did? What's the difference? Say it louder, please. More than that. More than that. More than just territory. What else did he do? He said, I got a country now. Right? He said, I got a country. So, for example, and here's why I say it matters. If you go back to 1933, Montevideo Accord, they worked out the definition of a state. Okay, so the definition of a state coming out of Montevideo was 1, you got to have territory. 2, you got to have a permanent population. 3, you got to be able to govern or administer political goods. And 4, you got to be able to enter agreements with other states. Those are the 4 criteria for a state. Additionally, Montevideo said, your political existence as a state does not matter on whether or not you're recognized by others. All right, so let's go put ourselves into Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's shoes. This guy did what Al-Qaeda never could. He did what Zarqawi never could. He planted the flag, and he said, I've got a country now. Come try and take it from me. And lest we forget, that country that they thought they put together was the size of Israel and Lebanon combined. Where was that country located? This thing that they started. 2 states, right? Iraq and Syria, right in the middle of Shia-dominated Middle East. And the natural enemy, the arch enemy of Iran, came and took land right in between them. And they held it for a while, right? So he did what no one else could. He put together a credible caliphate. And even if we don't think it was credible, they sure did. And by June of 2014, they had gobbled up the 2nd largest city in Iraq, Mosul. And it became the crown jewel of this so-called caliphate. Additionally, in Raqqa, they stood up their global capital. And they defied the world for the better part of 2 years, all the while preparing a defense that any Western army would have a hard time penetrating. Okay? And there's a reason they were able to do this. So let's talk about ISIS. And let's talk about what distinguishes it from Zarqawi, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the first super affiliate of Al-Qaeda's core. And then let's talk about Osama bin Laden. So Osama bin Laden built this thing coming out of the Soviet jihad in Afghanistan. What was Al-Qaeda central? The guys from Pakistan, the guys from Afghanistan. What were they built to do? They were built for one thing. To what? To attack. They're like a special operations unit. Think about Al-Qaeda. It is built to attack. And in 1996, Osama bin Laden declared war for the first time. Who did he declare war on in 1996? He declared war on the United States, the occupier of the 2 holy places, right, in Saudi Arabia, the land of the 2 holy places. In 1998, he reiterated his fatwa. And he declared war on Jews and Crusaders in 1998. What did he do in August of 1998 that he was not able to do in 1996? What happened in August of 98? That's right. He struck American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. What was the problem with those strikes, though, which is a recurring theme until 9/11? What did he do with those 2 strikes? Did he kill more Americans or did he kill more local Muslims? The latter, by a large measure, right? So those attacks in Kenya and Tanzania, they kind of got the world's attention, but they were severely damaging to the cause. Then he turned around in 2000, October of 2000. Once again, Al-Qaeda's built to do one thing. It's built to do what? It attacked again in October of 2000. Where'd that happen? Yes, Gulf of Aden in Yemen, right? USS Cole bombing. And let me tell you how my country, I was a captain back then, serving at Fort Lewis. In my mind, when someone attacks you and puts a hole in your ship and kills 17 sailors, that's an act of war. Yet we still misunderstood the problem. We kept calling it terrorism, right? And it was distant, and it was a navy, and for some reason, we tolerated a little. Meanwhile, this thing is growing in capability, and it's growing in its goals, its aspirations, right? How many members of Qaedas Core was there on September 11, 2001? I mean, I don't know, like I don't have their pay roster or anything, but there's only a couple hundred of them, right? Al-Qaeda was like a bunch of elites built to attack. And then September 11th happened. And that set off this sort of chain of events, this overheated reaction in some places that we'll talk about. But it's all linked together. The one thing that history, even a surface level understanding of history, will teach you is there are no permanent winners and losers. Right? It changes. That's life's essence, right? It'll never be September 10th, 2001 for Al-Qaeda's Core again. The whole world came down on it, right? And ripped it apart. When's the last time Al-Qaeda's Core, the guys in Pakistan and Afghanistan, those guys, bin Ladenism, when's the last time they put together a successful strike that was designed from the center and ordered from the center? Should be really intimate for you all. This is July of 2005, right? The so-called 7-7, the London bombings, right? That's the last time they were able to put something together from the center. They've gotten thumped up repeatedly. The whole world's trying to kill those guys, and it's really hard for them to put anything together. And in the global Salafist jihad, there's no monolith of ideas, right? There's not like one single actor. It's anarchic, right? They all compete with each other, and they compete for what? What do they compete for? What do these various groups compete for? Speak up, please. Yeah, they need fighters, right? They need manpower. What else, right? There's only so many fighters that are willing to come to the jihad, right? And they're going to choose this team or that team. And they choose based on who they think is winning. What else do they compete for? Influence. They compete for headlines. It's terrorism. What's the point of terrorism? Is terrorism about killing you or is it about scaring you? Right. They compete for headlines. What else do they compete for? Funding, right? So there's only so many donors out there, right? And they're going to send their checks this way or this way, just like they're going to send their fighters this way or that way. ISIS had a different approach. What sort of volunteers was ISIS looking for? I'm trying to help you all distinguish between where we were on 9/11 and where we were by June of 2014 when the Iraqis were staring down this future. What were they looking for? ISIS was looking for people to come to them, right? And they weren't just looking for fighters. Some reports are that they inspired 30,000 different immigrants that came to them, that came to this country because they wanted to be part of this thing. And we'll talk about why, that intoxicating narrative. What else did they really look for, though? Think about it. They're trying to build a country. And a country's government has to do what? It's got to provide security. It's got to provide justice, predictable justice. ISIS is really good at that, right? It's like 7th century justice, 2 scoops of it every day, right? But that's ISIS. So they do security pretty well. They do justice, their own brutal brand of Sharia. They do that. What else do they do? What else does a government have to do? Let's go again, please. Yes. It's got to be able to tax to generate revenues so it can administer political goods. It's got to be able to develop its people, whether that's schools or hospitals. That's what ISIS did. ISIS said, send us your doctors, send us your lawyers, send us your scholars. We're trying to build a country here. It's heaven on earth. That was the great lie. And it was convincing, and we'll talk about why here in a moment. All right, so Al-Qaeda, built to attack. Really has very little capability right now, and candidly, it's more like agitator-in-chief than commander-in-chief of the global jihad, all right? In 2003, the invasion of Iraq clearly breathed some new life into the jihad, right? It did. The only objective way to discuss the aftermath of the invasion of Iraq is that one of the outcomes is that the global jihad gained some momentum. And there was one star player who was the signature athlete on the jihadist team in Iraq. What was his name? Musab Zarqawi. So if you look back to Al-Qaeda Central, bin Ladenism, who is the number one enemy? Who is the far enemy, the number one enemy of Al-Qaeda's core? The United States of America, the far enemy. He built this entire thing to attack. And he said, we have to attack America because they're the ones backing the state of Israel. They're the ones that have been in Iraq stomping around. They're the ones that are in Saudi Arabia. They're the ones with these vassal states throughout the Middle East. So the way we conquer the Middle East is we need to get America out. We need to exact such a toll that the Americans leave. And their technique was terrorism. In 2003, the war in Iraq began. Complete dissolution of all governance. And emerging from that is this guy named Zarqawi. So let's talk about the character of Zarqawi. What was Zarqawi's number one enemy? Over here? Yeah, other Shia Muslims, right? He said unambiguously, we are going to attack other Shia Muslims. That's the number one. The rejectors of the one true Islam. We're going to attack them. And his strategy was to set off a civil war in Iraq. And I understand we got some of our Iraqi partners in here. They've lived this. These are their formative years as young people and teens. And that was his strategy. And in February of 2006, he bombed a Shia holy site in Samarra, and he set the civil war ablaze. And he essentially condemned 60% of the population, the entire Shia population of Iraq, to death. And he was a street thug. In Al-Qaeda, I told you they were elites. How did Zarqawi run his network? Zarqawi grew up where? Jails. Yeah, I mean, Jordan, right? But this is a guy, I mean, don't think about, I'm just telling you, jails, that's like Mujahideen University. It really is. This is where a lot of these guys make their friendships, make their connections, etc. And it plays out time and again. And Zarqawi builds his network. And it goes on a rampage and it sets off a civil war that you all are very familiar with. Eventually, it starts to taper out. And by 2010, the security conditions in Iraq start to become sufficient enough where policies, and who am I to question foreign policy by my government? But in 2010, the security conditions got to a point where we thought diplomatic withdrawal from Iraq was the natural order. It was something that made sense at the time. All right. The evolution of the jihad goes like this. There's a guy named Abu Dua. Abu Dua also made the most of his time in jails. But he wasn't in Arab jails. He was in American jails, right? He was at Camp Bucca. He was there for about a year. And by the time Abu Dua gets out, Abu Dua is perceived as the guy that all the jail guards are like, hey, he's a really good guy, he's peaceful, etc. All the while, he's got a vision. And Abu Dua is a very serious dude. And he's got a vision. He's going to start a country someday, and he's going to rule it with a harsh brand of Sharia, and he's going to take it back to the year 632, because that's when it was perfect, because the Prophet was still alive. And this guy named Abu Dua puts together his vision. And by 2008, he's the Emir of Mosul. In 2011, the civil war kicked off in Syria. And when you talk about the demographics of Syria, who rules Syria? A Shia regime or the Sunni? The Shia, the Alawite regime, right? 90% of the population or so is Sunni, however. And they're kind of on the outside of government looking in. And it's really tough when the government is the number one enemy of the people. If you get enough people who see it that way, it's really hard to maintain security. And this guy named Abu Dua, by 2011, he starts to see what's happening up in Syria. And by 2013, he says, now's the time. I'm Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi now, and I'm going to grow my army. And where did he grow his army? Up in Syria, because he knew our countries would never come to intervene. And he grew his army in Syria, where there's a whole bunch of Sunni Muslims on the outside looking in, and he put together enough of a force with enough malevolent energy and enough want to go take big chunks of Syria and Iraq. What's the significance of him naming himself Abu Bakr? Who was the first caliph? Abu Bakr. It's no mistake that he chose that moniker. And we're about to watch a video here because most of us are probably too young to remember. And the human mind's weird, right? The human mind tends to forget the pain and remember the ending. The human mind tends to forget what it didn't used to know, right? We have a hard time once we get new knowledge remembering what it was like to remember a world without Al-Qaeda. All right, so we're going to watch a video here very quickly. It's 1 minute, and it's to remind you of who the Islamic State is and what they were really able to do. These are very serious people. Roll the clip, please.
ISIS first rolled into Mosul in the summer of 2014. A few hundred fighters armed with little more than rifles and a terrifying reputation. That was enough. Almost without a fight, 30,000 Iraqi soldiers and 30,000 more police officers, trained and armed by the U.S., turned tail and ran, leaving behind their powerful American-made weapons. ISIS was suddenly the best armed terrorist group in history. Its fighters rolled from city to city in American Humvees, picking up recruits, some of them young children, along the way. They crossed the border into Syria, effectively creating a new state of their own, which they called the Islamic State. Their leader, Bakr AlBaghdadi, stepped up to the pulpit or minbar of the Grand Al-Nouri Mosque in Mosul and declared himself the leader of that state, the emir of the so-called caliphate. His men raised their black flag on the ancient leaning minaret and swore that Mosul would be theirs forever.
Okay, so let's talk about Bakr AlBaghdadi. That is the guy that we called Abu Dua. He changed his name. He becomes this other guy. And the speech that he gave there on July 4th, 2014, here's the kinds of things he says. He says, I must do this. It's my destiny and my duty to do this. He says things like, Sykes-Picot is dead. Erase the maps. He says, we're starting over. And they promised a Salafist utopia. What is Salafism? Someone? That's right. A very small strand of Sunni Islam that believes that the problem, the subjugation, humiliation, etc. of the Ummah has occurred because they've drifted too far from whom? Yeah, the Prophet, the way it was in 632, that it's perfect. That's what these guys believe. That's the big ISIS lie. That if we take it back to 632, that's going to be perfect, heaven on earth. And what is their promise? What is the only way you can get to paradise for these guys? There's one way. What is it? Martyrdom. To martyr yourself for the cause. Okay, so we start talking about ISIS. And by the way, this guy Bakr AlBaghdadi, if you look closely, he's wearing a Rolex watch. He wasn't sucking. Right? And this is about politics. So the theology is all a pretext for the politics. This is a very serious dude, though, and he was able to put this thing together. And he divorced himself from Al-Qaeda because he outgrew them. And he attacked and he saw how much land they were able to take there. Okay, so summarizing ISIS, my perspective on ISIS. I believe that if ISIS is anything, it's an army. It's built for a couple things. One, these guys that used to be the so-called caliphate, they must expand all the time. Why? Why can they never stop expanding? Do they give a hoot about your borders? Do they give a hoot about international conventions? No, that's a secular innovation. That's something dreamt up by infidels like us. All they care about is expanding because God knows no borders. God knows no boundaries. And because they must always expand, what does that inevitably mean? Cause and effect. If I'm always trying to expand, what's it mean? I got to fight. I'm always going to be at war. That's ISIS. Always got to expand. We'll always be at war. And when you talk about the character of ISIS, and we told you it wanted to govern, intimidation is the foundation of everything it does with governance. That's step one. Intimidate the populace, and then let's start administering by our own very strict brand of Sharia. We'll make it look like 7th century again, and all will be great in the world. That's the belief. They don't care about winning your hearts and minds. What do they do to hearts and minds? What do they do to them? They cut them out of your chest and skull. Intimidation is the foundation for everything these guys do. And by 2014, they were able to take a big chunk from 2 sovereign states, one of which was a partner of the United States. Okay? It's all very real. Less than 5 short years ago. Now, let's talk about the Iraqi security forces. I know we've got some in here. Here's my perspective on the partner. By the time 2014 rolls around, who were the generals running the Iraqi security forces? What were they doing in 1991 when our countries went to war with Iraq, with Saddam's army? They're generals in 2014, so they're probably like captains, majors, etc., back in 1991. These are the same guys who were trying to kill back in 91. Additionally, they grew up in an army that had 34 armored divisions at the apex of its capacity. Today, the Iraqi army's got 1 armored division. That's very humiliating for them. They really have a strong resentment towards Saddam Hussein for destroying this once proud army. 1979 was a really important year in this part of the world. What happened in 79? Who came to power in Iraq? Saddam. What happened in November of 79? Yeah, the Iranian Revolution started, right? And we forget these things. It's very hard for our minds to recall what it used to be like. In Tehran, 52 Americans sat for 444 days. And our country that's got all this capability today really had no solutions back then. It's extraordinary. What else happened in 79 in Afghanistan? Christmas Eve 79, right? The invasion, right? 79 is an important year. And for these guys who were the generals running the Iraqi security forces, in 1980, they began a very long war that was extremely violent with who? Right. So by 88, Saddam's like, man, I'm broke. That was expensive. And what's he decide to do by 90? Right? He's going to default on his debts and invade who and take what? Yes. So in 1991, we go after these guys. These are the same guys that are like the 2- and 3-star generals that we were standing side by side in Mosul. We were trying to kill them in 91. And by all accounts, a massive coalition overwhelmed them. Then, we bombed them consistently throughout the 90s, right? Then 2003 rolls around. Who are these generals in 2003? What grade are they in the machine at that point? These guys are colonels, right? And what do we try to do then when they're colonels? Try to kill them, right? They're our enemies. We went to war with them. There are no permanent winners or losers. And everything you do has consequences, some of which are unintended. And by 2014, ISIS had rampaged through western Iraq, northwestern Iraq, and there's a reason. Okay, it's absurd for us to suggest, and it's very naive, to suggest that the sectarian and the ethnic politics of the region aren't very real. And no one knows this better than them. No one knows this better than our partners inside the room right now. It's very real. When they say that everybody just left Mosul, Mosul fell in 5 days. Think about this. Moslawis felt like they were being liberated from their government in Baghdad. Under Prime Minister Maliki's regime, they thought that they were being liberated by ISIS coming. It is complicated. And these generals that we went all in on, specifically my partner, a guy named Staff Lieutenant General Abdulamir Al-Alami, I have massive respect for this man. He's an extraordinary leader. And we talk about our coalition, our Western coalition, 74 nations, 5 other organizations, etc., the counter-ISIS coalition for Operation Inherent Resolve. How about their coalition? Their coalition was comprised of 3 major players. One was the Iraqi army, led by Staff Lieutenant General Abdulamir. He's the Deputy Chief of Staff at the time. 2, the counterterrorism services. Counterterrorism service, once upon a time, was referred to as Iraqi SOF. These guys are really good. They're nasty fighters. They're really good at close combat. And they really have a tremendous amount of training relative to the other branches. And then the federal police. And General Abdulamir held together his own coalition on some extraordinarily violent days. Days when they would have 100 killed or wounded. And he would continue to try and poke, prod, urge, persuade. So a teaching point, fighting by, with, and through a partner who is reluctant at times. Here's something to consider. Here's what I learned about coalition warfare in this context. 1, you have to listen. That's step 1. 2, you got to maintain contact with the partner. I can't listen to you some of the time. I got to be willing. Listen, when you do this kind of fighting here where you fight by, with, and through a partner, this is my perspective. You don't get to choose your partner. You don't control your partner. I certainly didn't control General Abdul Amir. He made the decisions. It was his leadership and his ownership. But you must always put the partner first. And our mantra in the Falcon Brigade, the team that I was on, that we commanded, our mantra was that we will go as far as you need us to, no time too late at night, no distance too far. Any reasonable request you have for capability, we're going to do what we can to bring it to bear, to help you win, because your interests are our interests. So number 1, you got to listen. Number 2, you got to maintain contact. We would go everywhere with them, exhausting. I had a battalion commander. I only had 8 of them. I had a battalion commander who feasted. This is amazing. For the first time he feasted with the Iraqis was at the conclusion of Ramadan. He did the fast with them for the entire time as a show of solidarity. And he had a massive feast with them once the holy month ended. That's an American battalion commander, because he wanted his partners to know that he cared that much about them. So you listen, maintain contact. 3, you got to be realistic. I told you don't get to choose your partner. Some of these guys really want to fight ISIS and win. Some of them didn't, and all in between. You don't get to choose. But you have a duty to help them win, because their success is our success. The only reasonable way to define winning for us is to watch them take another block from ISIS. That's it. So you always got to listen. You always got to maintain contact. You got to be realistic. Okay, we call it advise and assist. I will tell you, on really hard days, it's more like assist to advise, right? Money talks. You have to assist in order to advise. They have to see you killing to help them keep moving. They have to know that you're there for them. And I'll come back to this theme in a moment. And then the number 5, the last thing I learned about this type of warfare, fighting by, with, and through. Again, number 1 is what? Listen. Profoundly simple. Number 2, maintain contact. You got to stay with them in order to listen. 3, that's right, you got to be realistic. 4, it's our twist on advise and assist. My predecessors in the 101st taught us this. You got to assist in order to advise. 5, this might be the most important one, because if you do all the other stuff, it puts you in a position to do this one. Don't ever forget that you have interest too, and when you have leverage, you got to have the guts to use it, because we got to win too. I have a mission too. Our team has a mission too. This coalition needs to win also. Don't ever forget your own interests. Right? Does that make sense? All right, so let's talk about this. I call it all 6 A's of A&A, all 6 A's of advise and assist. Let's go over here, please. There's 6 A's. Okay, the first one is advice. Advise, right? That's simple. And this one's assist. This one's accompany. Everybody's kind of familiar with that stuff, right? Advise, assist, accompany. So what's advice? What capabilities does a coalition bring that the partner might not have had in Mosul? Well, no, trust me, they got a lot of experience fighting these guys. I mean, they're essentially ISIS. ISIS was mainly comprised of who? Other Iraqis, right? I mean, this is the remnants of Saddam's old army who just got tired of the government and went the other way. A lot of them. The advice has to be grounded in intel, right? I'd encourage all of you to always start with the red pen. Don't even pull out your blue pen until you've put a significant... Remember, I said, hurry to think, not to plan. Who must you spend most of your calories thinking about? Right? And here's another thing about intel. You got to be humble about it. I've learned that there's far more we don't know than we do know. Yet we try to pretend that we have it all figured out. Remember, we went back to the beginning. We said it's about uncertainty, right? Combat's extraordinarily uncertain. Once it starts, I got no idea what's going to happen 30 seconds from now. But I know what my mission is, and I know what we need to continue to try and do. When it comes to intel, start with your red pen always, and design something in blue that can win against the red. But you really got to be thinking about the enemy. It's got to consume you. You got to be like your own intel officer. You owe it to our soldiers. You owe it to your commanders. That's how you solve the problem. We value your minds. Study, prepare, research, engage in debate. Don't try to be right, try to get it right. So our advice was always grounded in intel, our intel, the way we saw it playing out. Assist. Advise and assist. What's that second A? I would suggest it's pretty simple. How do you think we assisted the Iraqi security forces the most? It's real simple. Yeah, we killed ISIS, right? No, I mean, that's how people ask me, hey, what's the hardest thing about Mosul? ISIS. I don't overthink it. Yeah, they're serious dudes. They want to win, right? They might not be good at fighting, but they want to win. Think about this. You don't think willpower matters? Go fight ISIS for a while. Let me explain to you how all these untrained fighters who may or may not be able to even talk to each other because they're all from different places, may hate each other, but they unite around a common cause, which is a hatred of the other side, right? The rejectors of the one true faith, right? The one true Islam. They unite around this, and they're all fueled by this idea of martyrdom. That's a pretty good deal. If I die today, I get to go to paradise. That's not a bad deal. And they believe it. But on the final days of Mosul, after 9 months of bruising combat, why were women fighting? Why were people shooting their guns from wheelchairs? Because they want to win. True story, the Iraqi security forces would come back from the field, and they would say, today we had a mother walk up to our checkpoint with all of her children, and she killed herself with a bomb in order to kill a couple of us. It's not that she doesn't love her kids. Why does she do that? We've been talking about it because she wants to win. And think about when we get in here, think about what they promised each other. ISIS said, we're going to be surrounded by the guys from Baghdad that are backed by Tehran and Washington, D.C. and London. We're going to be surrounded by them, and they're all coming to kill us. How did it play out? And they said, we're going to starve. They're going to starve us to death in Mosul. And we're all going to be sick in Mosul. And they're going to destroy the city. This is what they told them. How did it play out? Go back to the first slide, please. This kind of violence in dense urban terrain requires a whole different rethink of what it really takes. I mean, you'll see this picture here. It's devastating. And it's because ISIS took every home, took every holy site, took every school, and turned them into fighting positions. And they had 2 years to prepare this defense. And they're very serious about winning. Look what it took. This ain't counterinsurgency. This kind of war in dense urban terrain, the kind of war that our Army's trying to prepare for, right? The kind of war against somebody with massive amounts of artillery, that if you don't shoot and move, they're going to kill you. This kind of war. This kind of war makes you rethink proportionality. That's not a house. That's an ISIS fighting position, and we must kill them there to help our partners win. It took extraordinary willpower, courage, to take shots to help the partner win, which brings me to my third point. Advise, assist, accompany. General Townsend, when he took over the coalition, he made a decision to push the advisors further forward so that we could get a fingertip sense of what was going on in the field and sort of hear the combat, feel the combat. All right, and at times we got in tough spots because we followed them everywhere. But it was all about this fourth A. The fourth A is assurance. So that on very, very violent days, like none of us have ever seen before, I'm there beside you, and you got a problem, and we are bringing our combat potential, the United States of America and coalition, JTFOIR, we're going to help you, Sadie. We're going to help you win right now. The Apaches are inbound. The bombs are inbound. The artillery's inbound. Because they had to fight through this. And there's a whole fourth dimension to this. I mean, Mosul's like biblical Nineveh, right? The place has been around for a long time. There's a whole different fourth dimension underground that you don't see. And ISIS was tenacious. And it centered the defense, this defense, it centered it around a couple things. One, the suicide car bomb. You and I can call for precision. I mean, my best friend, your best friend when we get in a gunfight is who? It's the Royal Air Force, the American Air Force, right? Come help me and kill somebody to help me move again. Right? That's what we do. What does ISIS have? They don't have bombers. What do they have? They got car bombs. That's their precision-guided munition. And it's intimidating. And they have a high payoff target list. They hunt, right? They send out their quadcopters. They got their OPs out. And their OPs might look like the people you're trying to protect. And when they see tanks come, or they see blade assets come, because that means the Iraqis are coming to breach and try and take another block, knock out an obstacle, what does ISIS do with its car bombs? Boom! Unleashes them. Straight killers. Right? You just can't recoup them fast enough. You don't have an infinite number of them. So number one, suicide car bomb. They scare people. They're tough. They're nasty. Big explosions. It's intimidating. Knocks out tanks. Knocks out blade assets. These finite resources that the Iraqis needed to keep moving in this extremely complex environment. Two, the second thing, look at this. 3 to 5 fighters. 3 to 5 fighters. Imagine 3 to 5 fighters. Just walk the dog with me. I'm talking 3 to 5. I'm not talking about a platoon. How hard would it be if we turned you all loose here to slow down an army? Hey, you each get a gun. You each get about 30 bullets. You 7, you're a mortar battery over there. You 8, you're really true believers. You get to be the car bombers. Go for it. You don't think you can make people pay a very steep price in this terrain? Sure you could. Let me show you what 3 to 5 do. That's 3 to 5 right there. That's 3 to 5 right there. 3 to 5 right there. 3 to 5 right. They never mass with more than 3 to 5, or they get smacked really hard by who? The coalition kills them, right? If you get like 9 of them in a huddle, boom, dead. If you get 3 to 5 of them, they knock out every wall, right? All the internal walls are gone, so they can move laterally. So they're descending and ascending up and down. They're moving laterally. I shot from this window this time. I'm firing from here, and it starts to become a grind. 3 to 5 starts to look like massive amounts of shooters. That's the second thing they depended on. The third thing they depended on, strict centralized control. Okay, here's how it manifests itself. I already talked about the suicide car bombs. Suicide car bombs, right? I got finite resources. They're like my little QRFs, my precision-guided bombers. I see a tank, boom, they got it. Those are controlled by the commanders, the suicide car bombs, right? They're quadcopters. The same things you could go to the sporting goods store and buy, the quadcopters. Let me tell you what it was like back in February of 2017. In February 2017, as the Iraqi security forces were attacking from south to north of Mosul, and I'll walk you through this very briefly, imagine swarms of 10 quadcopters coming out, each of them with 40-millimeter grenades to drop on you. That's like ISIS Air Force right there. Little 40-millimeter grenades, the same ones you shoot out of your rifles. They just drop them on you. And it doesn't kill a lot of the fighters on the Iraqi security forces, but it kills their courage. And so you start to teach them, you start to coach and work with them. You say, hey, we got to do cover, we got to do camouflage, we got to do concealment. We got to have air guards looking up, right? And then we did some other things to knock these things out of the sky. The ISIS fought there. Central control, though, they didn't have many quadcopters. Who looks at the full motion video feeds in our armies? Where are those things located? Who's got the screens that's watching what the collection's doing? It's the commanders, right? It is for them too. Strict command and control. If you can follow quadcopters, which are only good for flying at about 30 minutes or so, if you could follow quadcopters back to where they started, if you can knock them out of the sky and do what you need to exploit the intel that's in them, you're going right back to commanders. Kill them. Mortars and artillery. I'll tell you, ISIS only had 10 artillery pieces in Mosul. And their artillery fired only at our command posts, only at Iraqi command posts. Okay, the partners' command posts, our command posts. They're 10 artillery pieces, and they fought them like a battery. Let me tell you how they fought them. It's a massive city the size of Philadelphia, United States, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There's massive amounts of highway and overpasses. They would fight their artillery pieces from under overpasses, drive them out, shoot, and disappear. The last artillery piece we found in Mosul, we didn't strike the artillery piece. We just stuck it, forced it back under the bridge. We destroyed all the ground around it so it couldn't come out and fight anymore. We trapped it because we saw it and we couldn't strike it. Fine, we'll just destroy it all around it. We built a moat around it and it couldn't fight anymore. Those were strictly controlled. They're mortars. Literally, they would say, today we're firing 140 mortars today. We're going to fire 70 to the west, 70 to the east. And that's how they fought. Strict command and control. That's the third factor. Number one, suicide car bombs. Number two, 3 to 5 man squads fighting in there. 3, strict central control. When the commanders were on the battlefield, ISIS fought. They did not retreat. Because I told you, they're serious guys. These guys are born as Zarqawi, right? Street thugs. Very different the way they do things. If you're really good, you could be the platoon leader. If you're a really good platoon leader, promote, 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 promote. You can climb the ranks and become a general in ISIS real quick. Because it's all based on merit. You got to produce. It's powerful. We should copy it all. It's great. That aspect of what they do. They're serious dudes. And then finally, the last fourth thing that I think that they really depended on is ISF activity. Imagine the price you had to pay if you were down here on the bottom side of this cartoon. Imagine the price that was paid just to get this far. In blood and flesh. And if you've never seen a piece of shrapnel the size of your shoe, what it does to a human body, these guys saw it every day. And imagine if, man, we finally fought to this place and took this house, and then the house explodes and falls on you. That was the price they paid. And I tell you, General Abdul Amir, with his coalition of the counterterrorism services, the federal police, and the Iraqi army, he kept them going on some very, very difficult days. And we advised them with intel. We assisted them with fires, massing our fires, our potential of the coalition to kill ISIS in front of them. We assured them by being there with them, because we're always accompanying. Which brings us to the 5th A. Anticipate. If I'm always with you and I'm always listening, now I can start to anticipate. Okay, have you ever... You're all familiar with kind of like a combat training center where you go out to the field, you do your exercise, and I've got some observers out there. They're giving me feedback, right? This sort of OC, observer controller thing. All right, to help you understand the way we fought alongside them and by, with, and through them in Mosul, I call it the lethal observer controller network. It's an imperfect analogy. We weren't observer controllers, we're combat advisors. But this is how we fought. So if I'm platoon X, and I've got some guy that follows me everywhere, and he's always like talking about me, and you know, he's like critiquing everything I do, and he's talking to the other guy about what they're doing, and they all know what's going on way better than you do because you're stuck in the fog and the friction and the slaughter of combat, right, when you're training. And they're out there watching it all, and they're all talking to each other because they got great bandwidth. They get to, you know, have a dip of snuff, hang off to the side, talk about it. Imagine a coalition advisor network wrapping itself around the Iraqi security forces in a similar fashion. But imagine if those observers that are watching you train, in this imperfect analogy I draw for people, imagine if I had a moral obligation as the observer to attack the enemy also. Imagine if I had all kinds of secure bandwidth where I could move information and intelligence wherever it needed to be to get the right information to the right leader at the right time so he or she could make a decision. That's the essence of command and control. Imagine if I could bring massive amounts of fires to bear on top of what you already had. So we were kind of like that observer controller network, the lethal OC network. And it's a horrible analogy, but maybe it helps you think about how we help them. Advise, assist, we are accompanying them, we assured them on hard days, we could anticipate so that we were always agile. Our motto was they'll never have to wait for us. If the commanders decided we're attacking now, our charter was don't make them wait for us. We're moving to the sound of the guns with you. Okay? And those are the 6 A's of A&A. That's kind of how we tried to run our team as we fit into this ecosystem of coalition advisors, right? 74 different countries came together, far more than did it against Al-Qaeda, because ISIS did something Al-Qaeda never could, right? And we're at a point right now in the middle of Euphrates River Valley where the remnants of ISIS are still remaining, a little bit of them up in Syria. But this idea lives as long as the people who believe it are still alive. And many, many of them are. And just as we went from Al-Qaeda to Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, AQI, right, Zarqawiism, and then moved to this other thing called the Islamic State, this so-called caliphate, that we have ripped apart now, it's going to change. But these guys don't want to be an insurgency. They want to be what they were. But they want to be what they were bigger than that. So where's it pop up again? I don't know. There's a lot of troubled spots out there. You know, North Africa maybe. It's a tough place. Can't let your guard down in Syria. Right? Syria's a complicated environment. So it's all very hard all the time, right? And so the last thing I'm going to do here is we'll go to the map of Mosul, please. If you could pull that up. And I'll show you very quickly. This is Mosul. It's a massive city. Tigris River runs right through the middle. There was 5 bridges across it. And this is a place when Saddam was still in power, where very rich, wealthy, influential, and affluent Sunni lived. So what do you see along rivers oftentimes? You see big houses, villas, a lot of money and so forth. That's how Mosul was. The place is beautiful. Again, biblical Nineveh. Off to the east is the Kurdish region, right? And don't forget that the ISIS scourge went all the way up there and started pressuring toward Erbil as well. The initial counterattack back in October of 16 began behind the Kurdish lines because they had good interior lines and they were secure enough. And the initial attack, did I do that? Probably. Yeah, the initial attack came in from the east to the west. All right? By the time our team took over, there was just a little sliver up in the east. That was back in January, sliver like this, up in the northeast. That was back in, I did that again too, huh? So up there in the northeast on the north side of the river, a little sliver there. Now, just look at the geography, right? You should always let the battlefield talk to you a little bit. Look at the geography. If everything's attacking from east to west, what's the obvious problem in the west? These guys just hop across the river, right? So the fighting in the West Mosul was always going to be harder. In this area right in here, where it says Al-Rafidan, that's old Mosul. And that's where the final fights occurred. So the way this thing played out over time, by the February 1st or so, the attack up in the northeast had culminated, and the Iraqis were consolidating gains on the east side of the river. The coalition had knocked out at least one span in all 5 bridges across the river. All 5 bridges had at least one span out to try and slow down some of this east-west movement of the fighters. The attack kind of came from the south down here, and essentially on 3 different axes, all attacking from south to north. Any of you ever been to Mosul before? Mosul Airport no longer exists. It's been destroyed by ISIS and the fighting to take back the airport. There's an old place called Fab Merez. Some of you might remember that. That's gone too. Much of Mosul's gone. You saw how punishing the combat was just by the scarring of the terrain. Importantly, when this attack started on the south side back in February, by March or so, mid-March, the Iraqis had gotten to the midpoint of Mosul. And it looked like the Western Front from 1916. You see how violent it was, right? That first picture? It was stuck. The forward line of troops was not moving. And the toll was getting to be in it. It was exhausting for both sides. And we started really trying to coach them to change the geometry of the battlefield. By then, by March 17th of 2017, the east side of Mosul was coming back quickly. It was remarkable. People are very resilient. They could take a blow, repair themselves, get on with their lives. East Mosul was coming back. It was amazing. You know, they got like gyms going by March of 17. It's remarkable, man. Did you go to the gym in East Mosul while they're fighting in West Mosul? I mean, that's how it was. On the west side, by mid-March, they'd gotten about midway through the city, and the fighting had just ground to a halt. And it was taking remarkable amounts of violence. All 6 A's of A&A, our dramatically decentralized advisor network, bringing the potential of the coalition to bear to the point where we got to the point where we really had to start, here's fire's done well as a math problem. Because you're going to use a lot of it in this environment, right? So, any little thing here is, much of this is a math problem. You only have so much, right? And it got to the point by mid-March where we really had to start thinking about our own resources so that we could maintain the momentum. And we started coaching the partners to change the geometry of the battlefield. And on May 4th of 2017, an attack started up there in the north where you see 17 Tammuz. So finally we had hit this kind of what I called the hammer and anvil, right? The anvil was stuck midway through the city, and here comes the hammer is coming down from the northwest. And that's the 9th Iraqi Army Division, the armor division, the tank division in the Iraqi army is now attacking on the northwest flank. And I told you, ISIS only has so many car bombs. They're consuming their resources. They're 3 to 5 man teams. They got like these limitless. So here's another thing about kind of the way we think about risk. I would encourage you all to get in a mindset of like estimating risk, not trying to predict it. Because how many times did I hear they only got like 1,200 more fighters? They only got like 800 more fighters. They only got these, I'm telling you, because this kind of enemy, ISIS, these jihadists, they'll get older and they'll get younger, but they'll keep coming. Does that make sense? Before long, the 17-year-old is getting younger. Before long, the 50-year-old is getting older. Before long, the women are fighting because they want to win. Paradise, right? That's the promise. Here comes the hammer. On the 4th of May, it starts rolling down from the northwest. The third thing I told you that they needed was centralized control. And by this time, the slaughter had gotten to the point where they didn't have the juice. They didn't have the talent to fight in 2 directions. So now we got the anvil in the south. Here comes the hammer from the northwest. And on May 4th, the attack in the northwest started. By May 24th, up in that bend that we call the Bear's Nose, you see the Bear's Nose up there in the river? The Iraqis on May 24th put a bridge across the river. Awesome. We went out there and re-enlisted a guy. It was great. On the river. First time that the east and west have been connected across the river in 6 months. And you got the anvil, you got the hammer. What happens by the time you get to the old city? You get this kind of crush zone, right? Crush zone, where it all starts to get who's left? The most ardent fighters, the true believers. And as it gets tighter and tighter in there, does the violence go up or down? You saw it. It only gets harder. And so that Nuri Mosque that you saw, that's in the middle of Old City. That's where Bakr AlBaghdadi declared his caliphate. He destroyed it on June 24th of 2017, blew it up, rather than let the Iraqi security forces take it from them. And it buoyed them, it energized them. And by July, mid-July, July 17th was the day we dropped our last bomb in Mosul. It's the day, what do you think it did to the advisor network as the combat got harder? Where do you think we had to go? Closer or farther? Yes. Where do you think the Iraqi generals had to go? They fight like we expect our battalion commanders to fight, right? You want your battalion commander to go up to the breach and say, hey, let me help you solve this problem. Because I need to win right here, right now. This is the decisive point. The Iraqi generals had to go further forward. Therefore, we got pulled further forward. And it got increasingly violent as this whole thing started crushing down on itself. And I told you, they fought to the very end. The women, the aged, the infirmed. Because they believe that they're right and we're wrong. They're not very good at fighting, but they've got this conviction that's really hard to balance against. It's extraordinary. Okay, so by the time the crush zone starts to collapse on itself, July 17th, we drop our last bomb. Let me tell you what the Iraqi security forces had to do to win. This is what the last 2 rugby pitches worth of fighting in the old city looked like. And I've never told this story to an audience this size, but this is what it took. It took 14 dozers, bulldozers, big old 7K bulldozers, enormous dozers. It took bulldozers, supported by infantry, just to bury ISIS. Bury them. Keep moving, bury them. Boom, dozer's gone, bring up the next one. Bury them. That's how intense the combat was. And when they hit real hard spots, it got to the point where we could no longer strike in support of them. They had to use their own grenades. They had to bring in fresh infantry. And that's what the last several days of fighting in Mosul looked like. And the Iraqis, they made a call. I can either capture them, kill them, or let them leave, make them quit. And a lot of fighters bled out toward the end. But a lot of them got buried. Buried by bombs, buried by dozers. And that's how brutal the fighting was on the final days. So we applauded and we praised our partners because they paid an extraordinary price. And when you fight by, with, and through, I think it hinges on two principles. One, it's got to be led by them. Two, they got to own it. And I would tell you, General Abdul-Amir and his coalition on astonishingly violent days owned it and led it. And some of the most relevant work that we, the coalition team from Task Force Falcon, some of the most relevant work that any of us have ever done to help them win. Okay, so I hope some of that's informative to you. Well, we got like 10, 15 minutes or something? Yeah, something like that? Okay, so I hope that gives you a perspective, and I'd like to take about 3 or 4 questions here, please. We'll talk about whatever you want. It could be about this, it could be about anything. Anybody got anything you want, or you want to reply, respond, have a discussion? Yeah, please, up there. Sound off, please. Yeah, so his question is about, obviously it's a city. Obviously the city is designed for people to live in it. And obviously the people of Mosul, the Moslawis, are stuck in the middle of this fight. One, go ahead, have a seat, please. We had a very strict coalition rules of engagement. And we had processes that we could move relatively quickly. And I would suggest that the way we fought fires in Mosul, again, you got to change your schema a little bit, right? Change your schema. ISIS tends to evacuate areas. So let me tell you about ISIS tactics. When ISIS really wants to throw down and brawl, it tells all the people to leave, right? Because it wants to be a country too. Who are you governing if you're ISIS and everybody gets caught in the middle of this, right? So when it really wants to brawl, when it wants to take a stand, when there's a commander on the scene, they'll tend to evacuate civilians so that they can brawl. However, there was a time when they literally used people as obstacles. The mortar firing pit at the school, they'd literally make the kids play soccer right there. Because they knew that that would thwart, slow us, make us take pause on what they were doing, right? So we had to get really creative about the way we kill them. And there's a couple ways to take away his mortars. Overrun the position, you could strike it, whatever. You know, there's a couple different ways. But ISIS, the character of ISIS, believe it or not, oftentimes they would evacuate the places where they really wanted to brawl. We have to have the perspective, if you go back to that first one, those aren't homes anymore. Those are fighting positions. And I commanded Task Force Falcon around 5 big ideas. Okay, this is my commander's intent, and it'll kind of get to, first, protect yourselves and your partners. Protect yourselves and your partners. How can I assure you on very hard days if you don't trust me to be responsive with fires? This is why I told you it took a lot of willpower, a lot of courage by our commanders to continue to keep the attack going. But it was all done very carefully. It was all done with the strict rules of engagement. Everything that was questionable was investigated. And undoubtedly, ISIS put these people in the way of some incredible, and let's not ever forget it, ISIS hijacked the people of Mosul. They put them in the middle of this. And it's a tragedy. So we would execute our procedures, all supervised, and I was responsible, just like any one of you are, for every shot you take. Every shot you take, you're responsible for. And it was all scrutinized. And, you know, there's a lot of times when we couldn't strike when it would have really helped the Iraqis too, and they had to rely on their own capabilities. You know, you guys got to solve this problem because we can't. It's extremely frustrating for them when you're trying to assure them because they're the ones stuck in that. And we're just telling them we can't do it. Can't do it for all the reasons you mentioned. And they have to make their decisions. And someday, I mean, it depends on your worldview, but someday I'm going to stand before God too, right? For the decisions I've made. It's hard, very hard. This kind of war makes you rethink proportionality a little bit, right? What's it really take? What are the costs? What's it really take? I know you want me to move from that big minaret there 2 blocks. What are you willing to do to help us do that? It's a different kind of fight. And this is ISIS. Think about some of these other adversaries, right? The guys we prepare for. It's It's hard, very hard. What else? Yeah, please. Yeah, speak up, please.
You mentioned that your partner has a mission and your aim is also to help them with their mission. But what happens if your mission and their mission won't align? How do you deal with that and keep it fit?
Okay. Yeah, so kind of go back to, that's a really good question. Think about it. I said kind of rule number one is to listen, right? And if you listen, there's a reason you listen. So here's the partner. Here's the combat advisor. You listen so you can find your kind of overlap, right? A space that you can work in. It's called mapping out your interests with them. You maintain contact with them, right? At the same time, though, I kind of told you, and I already made this statement, you don't get to choose your partner, you don't control your partner, but you got to put the partner first. At the same time, I said, paradoxically, don't ever forget your interests. You know, we came to win too, but we're fighting by, with, and through, and it takes a great degree of patience, humility, empathy. It really does. I mean, ground combat is a human interaction with real people in the real world with real wounds and real death. So it takes a great degree of humility, empathy. Can I put myself in his shoes? Is there another way to, maybe we'll come back to this tomorrow. Is it really urgent? Because what you don't want to do is lose the partner, right? It's not about you, it's about us. You know, we're trying to help you win, and it'll rip apart the trust. So I would offer you, if you're listening and you're realistic and you can map out your interests a little bit, and you can work in that space on the really rough days, be empathetic and humble, you know, maybe, well, yeah, hell, it took 9 months to do it. What's 9 months and 5 more days? Right? They're the ones in there who have to take a knee once in a while because it's very, very rough fighting for them. That's hard. Okay, I got 2 more, please. One more? One more is fine. Yeah, please.
So I'm just going to tell you what 13 thing. What do you think that the Western forces can learn from ISIS?
Okay, he asked, what can we learn from ISIS? This is powerful, right? That's a great question, all right? How do you do the 180 on people? Told you to start with the red pen, right? If the Iraqi security forces are going south to north, and ISIS, the so-called caliphate, is always pressuring north to south, and until they change the geometry on them, you just had these 2 Arab armies smashing into each other in the middle of a city the size of Philadelphia. What can you learn from ISIS? Okay. When I say ground combat is not for the weak-willed, all right, courage is willpower. Any ever jumped out of a plane before? Right, it's scary, right? It can be. I say courage is like when the doors open on the airplane, you're like, man, I hope I don't die tonight. And you still walk out. That's why I love paratroopers. Because they still walk out. They're all scared. But they still walk out. What does ISIS do? ISIS has got a powerful sense of responsibility to its cause. It is, you want to talk about taking a blood oath? Blood oath. These are serious people. I call it the imbalance of conviction. When you look at those 2 opposing sides there on that little cartoon I drew, you can count on this. These guys up here, they wanted to win. It's extraordinary. They were outgunned, outnumbered, the whole thing from start to finish. All along the way, everybody tried to kick their butts. Like, I'm talking back to like the beginning. Yet they still got all this done. So they have an extraordinary commitment to their cause that I think is something we should appreciate because it's coming back in some form, right? 2, I would suggest that ISIS creativity, its innovation, it's bent on merit. The fact that if you're really good at fighting and leading, you become the general. I mean, that's how they roll. It's all about street cred. That's Zarqawi. They have a powerful narrative. Think about the way ISIS dominates information. Again, terrorism isn't about killing people, it's about scaring people. And their brand, their credibility spread in lockstep with their war of conquest because they did incredibly violent things. They filmed it, and they scared the world. These arguably little tactical actions, they were able to stitch together as this bigger campaign. And I would suggest that ISIS, you know, we tend to think of things as like, I'd suggest, we tend to think of things like, well, we got a problem here and a problem there and a problem there. We think about it like over time. like that. ISIS, this was kind of like a campaign. These guys had a long-term design. They had a pragmatic way to build a country that worked for a while in this environment before a coalition of so many they didn't have a chance came down on them. So they're coming back. This idea lives. Maybe that's something you can learn from your adversary. I don't know. All right, last question and I'll shut up. Yes, up there, please.
You mentioned Tehran. I was just wondering, obviously, with the retreat from Mosul, Mosul and then the Shia militias being a major part of the Iranian back, what was it like being a combat advisor when you have Iran, obviously a massive enemy of America, being such a big player in the campaign against ISIS?
That's a great question. So his question, if you didn't hear it, and this is a really useful one, and this is only my opinion, like any of this has. Nothing I've said here is my government's position, my army's position, the chief's position. These are all my opinions and perspectives. All right, his question. The Iranian aspect of the fight in Iraq, the fight in Syria. All right, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about what Iran has managed to do just to set the stage and to kind of help you understand why it's a strategic, not just its nuclear ambitions, not just its kind of appeal to the downtrodden, right? Not just its proxy wars. What has it really done, though? Think about Tehran's influence. It's very influential in Sana'a, right? An Arab state. So the Iranians are Persian ethnic people. It's very influential in Sana'a, an Arab state. It's really influential in another Arab state, Iraq, obviously, right? It's influential in Baghdad. It's influential in Damascus, another Arab state. It's influential in Beirut, another capital of an Arab state. So Iran gets past the ethnic, and it's able to arrange its theological, kind of its theocracy around this idea that sort of connects the Shia arc from Baghdad to Beirut. And these guys, the Islamic State, sat down right in the middle of that. An obvious natural-born archenemy. And if you think about the way the revolution cooked off, I mean, more or less, the Ayatollah and the revolution kind of did in 79 and 80 what these guys tried to do, right? Establish a theocracy in the Middle East. And they've hung around for a long time as a viable state. I mean, it's very real. They fight wars through proxy. So do we. So does everybody, and everybody acts in their own interests. I've heard Qasem Soleimani described as Osama bin Laden in a uniform. And if you look back to this, that big penetration, the attack that came in from Anbar toward Baghdad, as everything was moving, the ISIS army was going from west to east toward Baghdad. The call to arms went out to all Shia male, said, come here and protect the capital in Baghdad. And they did. And they did it very credibly. So you saw security forces fleeing Mosul, much closer to the capital. The militias rallied, backed by Iran, obviously, but also, they stood up and they came forward and they defended the capital in the south. They're baked into the fabric, right? They're part of the environment, these militias. And for us, we couldn't have any interaction with the militias. But let me tell you, when it comes to assurance, it's a competition out there, right? If I can't give guns to a partner, who might that partner turn to? They're going to go get guns, right? And if we can't help you, listen, if you don't make people feel included, someone else will. And they're masterful at fighting these proxy wars there. And they've got a lot of coalition blood on their hands and a lot of Iraqi blood on their hands. So it was a very careful environment. We had to stay away from them. We had to work the edges as we continued to fight behind and below our partners against ISIS, to kind of always respect that space. And as the militias became more prominent in certain areas, we just kind of steered away from them. We care about our interests too, right? So oftentimes it was like, you got to choose us or them with certain partners. The Iraqi army never came up. The Iraqi army is under the control of Baghdad 100%. Some of the other partners out there, though, could be influenced, right? And at times, our guys had to say, whose help do you want? And that was very real. And that's all tough. This is all majors and lieutenant colonels. And my job as the colonel was to try and backstop some of the risk that they were taking, help them think through, what they're doing, so that I could pull some of the decisions up to me if they were risky. Okay, so thank you for that question. All right, it's a real privilege to spend some time with you. Thank you very much. I'll hang out in the back if you have any other questions. Sir, thank you very much for your time. Congratulations to you all.